meeting of the Rhode Island. And we are, I'm going to call this meeting of the Rhode Island Marine Fisheries Council to order. We are recording and the meeting is officially underway. The agenda tonight is brief and essentially focused on one item, but we do have a few items to move through initially. The first is the agenda itself. Does anyone have any recommended changes or modifications to the agenda? Seeing no hands, is everyone comfortable with the agenda as proposed? Seeing a lot of heads nodding, the agenda stands approved by consent. The next item is the meeting minutes from the last meeting of the council, which occurred on May 3rd, 2021. Any recommended changes to those meeting minutes? Any objection to approving those minutes as proposed? Seeing no objection, the meeting minutes stand approved by consent, and we're on to public comment. This is an opportunity for anyone attending this meeting from the public who wishes to address the council on any item not on the agenda. The next item will be the Bowen application agenda. So anyone wishing to address the council on any other item is welcome to do so. Is anyone here from the public who would like to address the council on any item not on the agenda? If you would like to do so, please raise your hand. Use the raised hand feature. We'll give you a minute to figure that out. I don't think I see anyone present other than DEM staff and council members. So I'm going to assume, since I see no indication, that there is no public comment. If there is, we'll come back to it after the next item. And we will now move on to the next item. That is the aquaculture lease application, that being the application submitted by John and Patrick Bowen. The Bowens have had—
Bob, Chris has arrived.
Good. Chris Ryan is now participating, and I'm looking. Oh, Chris, if you could turn on your video, that would be helpful and necessary. So I'll look forward to seeing your face in a second here, but good to have you on board. But it is important that you turn on your video if you can do so. Thank you. I'm just going to give an intro here. The Bowens have had quite a journey with their application proposal. I believe it was first submitted in 2019. It was then subject to a preliminary determination hearing in February of 2020. It was then noticed in April of 2020. It was reviewed by DEM Marine Fisheries in June of 2020. It was then reviewed by this council's Shellfish Advisory Panel in September of 2020. It was then forwarded to this council for review in November 2020. And I believe there were also some other local reviews during that span. Last month, May of this year, the application was brought before the full CRMC for final decision. At that CRMC meeting, the CRMC attorney found that the record is incomplete because there is no recommendation from this Fisheries Council. Per the governing statute, the CRMC cannot consider aquaculture lease applications without recommendations from DEM and the Rhode Island Marine Fishery Council. Thus, the matter is on hold with the CRMC pending a recommendation from this Fishery Council. As you will all recall, the reason why there was no recommendation provided by this council is because when the matter was considered in November, 2 motions were made, both failed, and no other motions were made. Accordingly, we sent a letter stating that the council was unable to formulate a recommendation. We were not aware at that time that our inaction would render the record incomplete and prevent final action by the CRMC. Now that we have become aware, we are meeting tonight to render a recommendation and allow the applicants to move through the process, that is, to the CRMC for final decision. Before we take up the matter, I just want to quickly review the materials that have been provided to the council and are part of the record for tonight's meeting. The first is the full revised application submitted by the Bowens, including the proposed revised site location, as well as their original application. The second is the minutes from the November Marine Fisheries Council meeting at which the proposal was initially considered, and the letter sent by the council to the CRMC based on that meeting. The third is the SAP meeting minutes from their meeting last September. The fourth is a recently updated recommendation on the application issued by DEM Marine Fisheries as well as the initial recommendation issued by DEM Marine Fisheries 1 year ago. Lastly, we have a set of written comments that were submitted just over the past couple of days. The first is a letter dated June 4th, 2021, submitted by Dr. James Quinn. The second are 2 emails forwarded to the council by the applicants. One dated May 21st, 2021, sent by Patrick Bowen to Peter Jenkins. The other dated June 3rd, 2021, sent by Patrick Bowen to Steve Medeiros and Rich Hittinger of RISA, Rhode Island Saltwater Anglers Association. The third is a letter dated June 3rd, 2021, and an accompanying PowerPoint presentation sent to the Shellfish Advisory Panel by Kenneth Mendez. With that, we are ready to proceed with consideration of the application. Since there was no motion passed by the council last November, there is no action needed to bring this back before the council. It is back de novo by virtue of our meeting notice and agenda. I'd like to proceed by first giving Ben Getch, CRMC Aquaculture Coordinator, and/or the applicants the opportunity to address the council. We already received the SAP meeting report at our November meeting, so I don't see the need to revisit that, although we could if any council member wishes to. I will then afford the council the opportunity to ask any questions of Mr. Getch, the applicants, or any DEM staff. I will then invite any member of the public who wishes to address the council on the application the opportunity to do so. I will then look to the council for a motion, that being in the form of a recommendation to the CRMC as to whether or not the activities proposed in the application are or are not consistent with any competing uses pertaining to marine fisheries in the area. So that's our charge for this evening, and that's all the background that I was able to pull together and thought relevant to enter into the record to make sure that we're all on the same page. So with that, I believe staff has a slide. Does anyone want to speak to this slide, or is this just aimed at capturing the essence of the application? I'd like to turn the floor. I think we'll leave this slide up as I turn the floor over to Ben Getch. Would you like to offer any comments, Ben, or would you like to defer to the applicants, or would you all like to speak? The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Bob. Apologize, my voice is a little hoarse today. I'm fighting a cold. So yeah, this is a small lease proposal, just under an acre, near the Sepauwett Recreation Area. This is the version of the lease that CRMC supports. My presentation, other than that, really hasn't changed much since the last meeting. It's about just a few relevant facts. It's about 200 bottom cages, 2 feet by 4 feet by 14 inches tall. There'll be about 20 trawls of cages with 10 cages per trawl. And the depth of the site is about, at mean low water, it's about 2 to 4 feet. There were no quahogs found in the shellfish survey. There was a part of this new area that was also surveyed after the fact, just to ensure there, again, no quahogs found in that area. Other than that, I'm happy to answer any of the questions. CRMC supports this revision, as does DEM. And if there are no questions, I'll turn it over to the applicants.
So first, any questions for Ben before we go to the applicants? If any member has a question, feel free to raise your hand. I'll look to see, and I don't see any hands. At this point, I'd like to afford John and/or Patrick Bowen the opportunity to address the council. Would either of you like to do so?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Patrick Bowen.
Go ahead.
We're pleased to appear again before this council to discuss our proposal for a small oyster farm in the Sakana River. We have been made aware of concerns recently raised by some recreational fishermen regarding our proposed oyster farm. We would like to address any such concerns directly and assure this council that we are in fact pro-recreational fishing. We grew up surf casting on the shores of Tiverton and Little Compton and cherish the rights and traditions to the shore and the fishery. We have designed our farm to be entirely subtidal. At low tide, the only elements which will be visible will be the corner marker buoys. Our gear design and layout is intended to accommodate recreational uses in the area, from kayaking to fishing. We believe, and studies have shown, that this type of oyster gear has the effect of an artificial reef and will substantively enhance fish habitat by providing structure, improving recreational fishing in the area. Our proposed farm area is less than 1 acre, and our gear at full capacity will cover less than 4% of that bottom area. As noted, our application goes back to December of 2019. Our preliminary determination was the last in-person meeting of the Tiverton Harbor and Coastal Waters Commission. Our public notice period was extended to accommodate the COVID state of emergency. A link to our application was posted on the homepage of the Town of Tiverton website. We believe that because of the Zoom and YouTube format, our application process has been made more public and more accessible than any previous such applications. We have appeared before the Shellfish Advisory Panel, the Rhode Island Marine Fisheries Council, and 3 times before the Tiverton Harbor and Coastal Waters Commission, who at their meeting on March 1st, 2021, voted unanimously to recommend approval of our application. The overwhelming majority of correspondence received and on file for this proposal is positive and supportive. Each of our 5 meetings was publicly posted, and notice, including our application, was provided to a wide cross-section of interested parties via email from the CRMC. A letter dated June 2nd, 2021, which you referenced, from Rhode Island DEM Divisions of Marine Fisheries and Fish and Wildlife states, quote, "The DMF does not have concern with competing uses," and further states, quote, "The divisions do not have objections to this application." The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has reviewed our application and on January 5th, 2021, issued a permit for our proposed activities. Based upon this level of review and acceptance, we trust that this council will concur that our proposal is consistent with competing uses engaged in the exploitation of the marine fisheries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And are you speaking on behalf of your brother, or would your brother?
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. This is John Bowen.
Very good. Thank you both very much. At this point, what I'd like to do is see if there are any members of the public who would like to address the council on this application. The best way to indicate your interest in doing so is to use the reactions button at the bottom of the page, the Zoom page, and there's a raise hand feature. If you click on that, staff will acknowledge you and help ensure you have the opportunity to comment. So I do want to pause now and see if there are any members of the public who wish to comment, and I'll look to staff to assist in helping me determine if anyone has their hand up. I do see one. I see a Kenny Mendez. I hope I'm saying that name correctly. Mr. Mendez, the floor is yours. We'll have to figure out a way to unmute Mr. Mendez.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you, sir.
I appreciate your patience, and I certainly respect the amount of time and effort that the Bowens have put into this. I live on the marsh. I've got a house there, and I fish this area often. And there are a couple of things I'd like to just say, and the reason why this has taken a long time is because there's been no angler's voice, a true angler's voice in this. And the process of notifying recreational anglers has been challenging because of the location of the oyster farm and the fact that there's no place to post there and people have to go and find that. And in fact, this meeting tonight, I had no idea about until I was emailing to follow up how to make sure my letter got to the rest of the council. And then I found out that there was a meeting tonight as well. The second piece that the council should know about is that at 7 o'clock tonight, the Tiverton Harbor Commission is meeting again on this based on angler feedback from my letter. So while they might have approved it earlier on, I think the fact that I've tried to speak for the recreational angler and someone who actually uses that area and has fished it quite extensively, almost 24/7 sometimes, because striper fishing is really good at night, that I want to speak for those anglers who use it. And in fact, at the CRMC meeting, I had 4 or 5 other anglers set up because we knew about that meeting in advance, but we only found out about this meeting tonight. And I was the only one who could make it. Peter Jenkins from RISA, who is representing RISA, can't make it, but I know that since I've raised this with them and shown them my PowerPoint, and they've heard from other anglers that they understand that this is a challenge and takes away fishing access for recreational anglers. My issue here isn't with the oyster farm. If it could, or oyster farms in general, I believe in clean water. I believe they're filter fish. We all have the same interests in mind. But to drop an artificial reef here where there's one that's not really needed, it sounds to me like an excuse to put an oyster farm there. Anyone who spin fishes there, in the presentation that I sent in shows you the casting range of anyone who spin fishes that area. You could wade into that area, you could cast into that area, and if you are using a sluggo or any sinking line, if you're a fly fisherman, or a subsurface line, it would hit bottom because you often, you would snag the oyster cages. So this is a public access area for fishing, and it's designated as that. And the location of the oyster farm would directly take away from anyone who wants to saltwater fly fish or spin fish in that area. And I believe that once RISA had some input from people who use the area, they've come out formally to object against the project. If the project could be moved further south, that would be great. But then I imagine they run into some issues with respect to some moorings there. This area was designed for recreational anglers, windsurfers, kayakers, and I believe that's one of the strengths and beauties of Rhode Island, that we have access to those things as recreational wade fishing anglers. You don't need a boat, and there are very few places where you could have easy access like this, where you could park and wade out there at all hours of the night if you want to fish for striped bass, large striped bass who come in at night. We don't need a reef there. We just need access for anglers. So I'll leave it at that. I've also got, I think I'm speaking for my family members who also fish the area. William Mendez is on the line. My son, Liz Mendez, my wife, is on the line, but I think I speak for them as well. It's public access area. It's meant to be that way. And by establishing a commercial operation there, it would take away from fishing access for the recreational fishermen.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I want to now, we've got some feedback going on, so I'll ask folks who are not muted to please mute yourself. Thank you. Is there any, I see Dave Monte's hand up, but I do want to see if there's any other public comment first. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to address the council on this issue? If so, please use the raised hand feature on the bottom of your screen. I'll give one more minute here. I don't really see any other names that look to me like they are members of the public, other than perhaps Mr. Mendez's family, and we appreciate your attendance tonight. Again, any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll go to the council now. Dave Monte, you had your hand up?
Yes, this is a question for Mr. Mendez. The revised game plan, there's no question that the outflow In fact, you can't really see it on the visual up in the screen, but on the other satellite images, you could clearly see the path of the outflow. The original location was right in the middle. If everyone can recall, that was sort of an oblong lease area, and it was smack in the middle of the end of the outflow. This is sort of on the edge of the outflow, moved further south. So my question, Ken, is obviously you are aware of the reconfigured lease area, and is this being further south and not in front of the outflow, in fact, further away from where people fish?
Thank you for that. I actually, if I could share my screen, I could show you. I mapped that out. It's still not south. It's not far enough south. And I think you run into two problems if you move it far enough south, further south. I think you could ask Ben. I think you run into issues with respect to the moorings that are there, which are, and then I also don't know if you move it further south where you run into community input, and they'll need to let the local community know about the proximity to their properties, because maybe it moves outside of the state area. So, I mean, it's still within casting range. You could not only within casting range, but you could wade in there with a rod, and you can physically walk into the northern third or half of where they've relocated it, and you could still cast a plug or a rod in there, and the fish come right up in there. There's a reason why an oyster farm would probably be great there, because there's great outflow from that creek, that whole downstream area from it, and the fish come up there as well in that whole area. It's a well-kept secret. It's off the beaten path, and that's why there hasn't been much comment there, because not many people know about it, but it's a terrific fishery.
Thank you, Bob. I have two more questions. Should I hold them, or should I ask them now?
No, the floor is yours, Dave. Go for it.
Okay. This question, and I know the Bowens, I just saw a chat comment from them that they wanted to speak. I just want to make it clear and would like clarification from the department, the division, on this issue. They said that the division said that there was no conflict with fishing. I believe what they said in Jason's letter was no conflict in shell fishing. And I just want clarification, because I don't have that letter in front of me, because clearly there's a conflict with recreational fishing here. There's no doubt in my mind there is, based on Mr. Mendez' testimony. Peter Jenkins, who is a member of the RISD board, as you know, I serve as a vice president of that board, and he heads up our advocacy, our access committee. And he knows that area, being from Aquaculture Island as well. So there's no question in my mind that it is in conflict with recreational fin fishing. I just want to make sure that the division did not say that it wasn't in conflict with recreational fin fishing. So that's my first question, Bob. The next one is, a lot of these issues we're talking about would have been vetted by the Shellfish Advisory Committee, and we have 3 fin fishermen, or 2 anyway, on that committee, as well as shell fishermen, for this very reason. And I'm wondering why this did not go back before the Shellfish Advisory Panel, where some of this could have been vetted. So those are my 2 questions.
So I'll answer the second one first. The reason why it didn't go back is because the motion to do that failed at our November meeting. It was a motion to do just that. It failed. And so that's the short answer to your question, Dave, on your second, regarding your second question. To your first question, I'll look to DEM staff, perhaps Connor McManus or Anna Gerber-Williams, whoever is most comfortable addressing Dave's first question.
Hi, yes, Mr. Chair. This is Anna Gerber-Williams from Division of Marine Fisheries. When we review these aquaculture applications, we always look at any conflicting use with the recreational shellfishing layer. We don't have much to go on for when it comes to any sort of recreational anglers. So we don't speak to that in our review of these applications, but we do speak to the recreational shellfishing that occurs in those areas. And so we, in our response, we're referring to, we don't see a conflict with the overlap in use for recreational shellfishing in the area, especially since the CRMC performed their site assessment and they came up with no cohogs within the footprint of the proposed site area. So any of the finfish concerns were not addressed in our letter since we don't speak to that in our review of the application.
Thank you, Anna. Dave, did that answer your question? Or were both of your questions answered sufficiently?
They were. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I do know that let me see if there's any other council members that wish to ask a question. I understand perhaps that the applicant may have, Mr. Patrick may have had a interest in responding. If that's true, Patrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And if I may speak to the two questions that Mr. Monty had. The letter dated June 2nd of 2021 and signed by Mr. Jason McNamee does in fact say that the DMF does not have concerns with competing uses or impacts to the shellfish resource. So that would indicate to me that in fact, and again, starting in our preliminary determination in Tiverton, one of the Tiverton council members had discussed it to a small extent, but it was never an issue. And further, as you had mentioned, Mr. Jenkins, both my son and myself and my brother went to speak to Mr. Jenkins in person as well as an email. But members of the board of directors of the Rhode Island Saltwater Anglers Association were not only notified of these meetings beginning in December of 2019, but actively participated as members of the Shellfish Advisory Panel and also of this Marine Fisheries Council. So to suggest that notification for any of these meetings was lacking, I think is not true. That members of the Rhode Island Saltwater Anglers Association, beginning in December of 2019, received notification of this application. At no point in time in any of these meetings was the issue of conflict with recreational fishing raised, not by the CRMC, not by the DEM, not by the SAP, and not by the Marine Fisheries Council, not by the Tiverton Harbor and Coastal Waters Commission either. And certainly, this process begins at the local level, and appropriately so. And at no point in time did Mr. Mendez come to any of those meetings in Tiverton or via Zoom, as was the case. So to chime in at the 11th hour with conflict seems to me a bit disingenuous.
Thank you for that response. I'm going to go next to Chris Ryan, council member. Chris, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask for a clarification, Bob, or perhaps a reiteration of our council standard of care on this. I mean, we have addressed several of these in the 5 or so years that I've been on this council, and we've always used the term as to whether or not it is a conflict with other uses of the area. But what is the standard of definition of conflict? Is it any conflict? Is it, a conflict with 1/4 of an acre? What is the judgment level for when a conflict arises? I really think that our council members here need to think on that a little bit before a motion is made and a decision is made.
Thank you, Chris. In some ways, I take your question as rhetorical because I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's a judgment call as to, and now I'm going to read from the statutory language that governs this process. And it's the only thing we really have in the way of guidelines. And that is for this council, for this Fisheries Council, to recommend to the CRMC whether or not the aquaculture activities proposed in the application are or are not consistent with any competing uses engaged in the exploitation of marine fisheries in the area. That's all we have to go on. And I think, as you note, on a case-by-case basis, this council has rendered recommendations that reflect their best judgment as to whether the proposed activities are or are not consistent with any competing uses engaged involving marine fisheries.
Thank you, Bob. That was my recollection. I just wanted to hear it confirmed for the purpose of this decision because, that was my understanding over the years as we've made these decisions. I just wanted everybody on the council to have that repeated to them before we wade into this further discussion and decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to see if any other council members have any questions or comments. Dr. Rice.
Yes. Is there an implication, perhaps, that the marking of the lease is insufficient so that people it is difficult for people to avoid it? If people knew it was there, would there be less conflict?
Ben Getch, can you confirm that the markings are the four corners and buoys at the four corners? Are there any other markings besides those?
Yeah, no, this lease would have the standard four corners marked. Usually it's with a pot buoy, and they are required by regulation to have their ascent number on the buoy. Sometimes with different types of gear, with like floating gear, we might have the high flyers, radar reflectors with solar powered lights to aid in nighttime navigation. That has not been a staff concern, nor is it a concern that has been raised directly with regards to marking. So that is how CRMC would want to see the site marked with just the four standard pot buoys. If there was reason to do it a different way, I'm sure we'd be open to that. We could certainly stipulate that in an approval if necessary.
Dr. Rice, did you have a follow, or did that answer your question?
That sounds fine. I just wanted to basically hear what the deliberations were on markings and whether it was felt they were sufficient. So Ben covered this very well. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do see Mr. Mendez's hand up, but I do want to first make sure the council has thoroughly deliberated on this before I will give you one more opportunity, Mr. Mendez, but first I'm looking to the council for any, Jason Jarvis, you're next. Go ahead.
Okay. I guess the way I look at this is first to give some perspective. I still can remember the first Fisheries Council meeting I ever went to long before becoming a council member. And I remember some of the difficult parts of our job was the fact that we have to deal with multiple stakeholders in a state that has an enormous amount of acreage of shoreline and in places where people fish and access the shore and go clamming and fishing, either recreationally or commercially. And I think our job is to try to find balance between the two. And my perspective on this is that John and Patrick started going through this process 2 years ago. I think one of the only objections was there wasn't much clarity as to where it was going to be located. Besides that, I don't think there was another issue with it. Again, I just think the most difficult part of all of this, I mean, I've been in every end of the fishing industry. For hire, dragging, gill netting, lobstering, even oyster farming. I mean, I've pretty much covered all of it. So it's not that I don't have a good view of what's going on. I just think that we as a council have to figure out the best path to take so that you know, I hate to say it this way, but that the pie gets cut up equally. And I mean, it's a difficult job. It's not easy. And that's what we're here for. I mean, that's why everyone on this council has a lot of experience in this business, in all ends of this business. I mean, we deal with a lot of this in Westerly, where it's, you know, we get a lot of arguments about public access, fishing access, so on and so forth. But we still manage to find some balance. So I think that's kind of our job here. I think John and Patrick have gone at this for a couple of years, and they've jumped through a lot of hoops. So that's what I got to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. I'm going to ask Steph to pull down the presentation just so we can all, there we go. I think this is an easier way to deliberate. Are there any other council members with a question or comment? Chris Ryan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Jason, thank you for expressing your thoughts too. You were hitting on the same things that I was thinking of as we consider this thing again. And you used the word, the experience that the council has, and we all have a variety of experience from different perspectives. So I feel like I have to put mine out there for my fellow council members to consider. And I'm a shoreline recreational fisherman. I don't own a boat. I actually don't love to fish from boats. It's not that I don't like boats, but I just love to wade in and be up to my waist in the water and be there with the fish when I catch it. So I have a strong personal opinion about fishing in a place like we're examining right now. But for 4 decades, I have been an environmental consultant, consulting on the environmental impacts of pretty substantial development projects. And when I put that hat on as an experienced environmental consultant who has to weigh the scientific impacts and the positives and the negatives of things, and have gone through many processes regulated under the National Environmental Policy Act, I could tell this board and this council and this audience that under a NEPA review, this less than 1 acre of bottom disturbance with so much other sea floor and sea surface to fish in recreationally would not be considered a significant adverse impact. And I have to say that I also consider it that way. We have to make some choices here to help balance how Rhode Islanders use our bay and our ocean. And I'm just going to say that even though I'm hugely empathetic to shoreline recreational fishermen being one, my professional judgment tells me that this is not a significant compromise of the ability for multiple parties to use this place for multiple purposes. So there's my statement, and I hope that it resonates with my fellow council members.
Thank you, Chris. What I'd like to do now is just give Mr. Mendez one final opportunity to comment. I would hope, Mr. Mendez, since you already had one opportunity, that you would address you would be concise and address whatever you might have to say to anything that's been offered during this meeting. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? So just a thumbs up. Just want to make sure I can hear. Okay, great. I appreciate this. And I just want to respond to the Bowens. I mean, this isn't disingenuous. This is just the process. RISA, I think, still objects to this. So as an organization, there's still, once they understood the fishery and once they heard from people who are in the community who actually fish this, there is a larger objective from the voice of the angler within Rhode Island. So I appreciate Mr. Rain's comments about the minimal impact of this, but you're hearing from local anglers and anglers from afar who come in and fish in this area recreationally. There are very few of them around like this. So what might be a small percentage in a NEPA study to Mr. Rain means a lot to the 20 or 30 anglers I know who fish this area, fish it round the clock, fish it at night. So I would just encourage you to think about the voice of the angler here who actually uses this, who has not had a chance to put input into this because the process is just not allowed for that along the way. There's no way to publicly post it. There are no postings in RISA. We only find out about this through word of mouth and by chance. So I just want to make sure that you know that had there been a better process where more anglers could weigh in, there's some momentum now where anglers who are finding out about this spot has been written up in books as an off the beaten treasured spot for the striped bass fishermen and the inshore saltwater fishermen. And it's clear that that's in my presentation. So I'm just trying to speak for the recreational angler for this spot, that we just did not have a chance and no notification. And I apologize to the Bowens for all they've been through over the last 2 years. But in terms of balance, the recreational angler's voice has not been engaged in this as much. And if it had been engaged earlier on, I don't think we would have gotten to this spot.
Understood. Thank you for those comments. So let's go back to the council now for any final questions or comments. And I would also, I think at this point, be looking for a motion that would sort of get things going in terms of a recommendation to the CRMC as to whether or not based on everything you've heard, your deliberation on the record and the comments offered tonight, whether or not this application is or is not consistent with any competing uses engaged in marine fisheries in the area. Dr. Rice?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion, and my motion is to recommend to the CRMC that although we've heard considerable information about this, that on the larger scale of things and making all of the balances, that there is minimal impact on capture fisheries with this project.
Would you be comfortable, Dr. Rice, phrasing that in the sense of is consistent with any competing uses engaged in marine fisheries in the area?
Yes.
Thank you. So is there a second? And I see a second by Chris Ryan. So we'll look to staff to get a motion up on the board, moved by Dr. Rice and seconded by Chris Ryan to recommend to the CRMC that the application, the proposed, that the Bowen Aquaculture lease application, let me start from the beginning. Move to recommend to the CRMC that the Bowen Aquaculture lease application numbered 2020-04-037 is consistent with competing uses engaged in the exploitation of the marine fisheries in the area, I think is the right way to sort of finish that. And so with that discussion on the motion by council members, Dave Monty?
I appreciate my colleagues and their experience on the council, but this motion says that this site is consistent in not interfering with competing uses, and it is. It is competing with existing uses. If there were shellfish in that area, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. If commercial fishers fish this area, we wouldn't be having it. Here, this is clearly a recreational area. Historically, I don't know if you saw the books, Mr. Mendez is correct. Books have been written about this spot, about how it is an ideal place to recreational fish. There's outflow there. People fish the outflow all the time. It is in direct competition with recreational fishing. And there's no way you're going to be able to cast near there without fish for striped bass, without from shore, without getting tied up on this gear. So it is going to eliminate the whole mouth of the outflow for recreational fishing.
Thank you, Dave. Chris Ryan?
Yes, and Dave, you know that I respect your opinion and your evaluations greatly, and we've served on this council together for quite a while. And I see where you're coming from. But I will also say, and I already made the case about my scientific observations, but as a recreational shoreline fisherman who does a fair amount of shoreline fishing, I bet you there'll be lots of us who will figure out a way to catch some striped bass down at that spot, even after 9/10 of an acre of the seafloor have oyster cages on them. I just cannot be convinced that the conflict is so great that this entire spot will become unusable or unwanted by recreational shoreline fishermen. So I want this to be a totally unemotional argument, but I just think that we need to balance the uses of these areas. And I believe that recreational shoreline fishing will continue even after the Bowens begin to put oyster cages there. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Chris. Dr. Rice?
Yes, and as the maker of the motion, I agree with Mr. Ryan on his assessments, 100% of this. Many of the documents that we've presented in terms of the recreational fishing have to do with, fishing, largely fishing in the channel. The opening of the outlet of the waterway has been cleared by this effort to move the lease further to the south, but not as close as the mooring fields. So I really do feel that there has been a good deal of due diligence over this period of time to minimize any sort of impacts to the recreational fishing. This is a strong balancing act, and I know that there are some strong emotional feelings about this, but I agree with Mr. Ryan on his assessment, is that this less than an acre that is well marked can be well known by the community to not cast in that into that direction, into those four corner markings. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. Other members of the council wishing to weigh in on the motion before the council? Seeing no hands, is the council ready for the question? And this will be obviously a vote that we'll want to make sure we record carefully. I believe there are 7 of us, including me. I typically don't vote as chair. So I'm going to call the question. Unless there are any other comments or questions from the council, seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 3. Those opposed, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to ask Joe Lobianco, are you on?
I am.
So as counsel, as attorney for this council, and given the travel of this issue, we have a tie vote right now. I have the prerogative as chair to break the tie. Is it your opinion that I would be well advised to vote one way or the other, or do you feel comfortable that this could go forward as well, it would be a failed vote 3-3. So what is your recommendation given where we are in this process?
I think at this point, you've got to vote.
That was a succinct answer, and one that I will heed, and I will vote in favor of the motion to recommend to the CRMC that the Bowen Aquaculture lease application is consistent with competing uses engaged in the exploitation of the marine fisheries in the area. My rationale is very consistent with all of the comments made by the proponents, and with due consideration and recognition of the concerns expressed by those in opposition. But the process is the process, and the motion passes 4-3. Unless there's any other, anything else we need to do with this item, I believe we have completed our action on this item. And with that, we have really nothing left on the agenda. Pete, correct me if I'm wrong, is there anything left to be addressed tonight?
That is it.
That is it, which means if there is no objection, we will adjourn. Thank you so much to everyone who participated in this process, and have a good rest of the evening. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.